Drakes are a really unique faction, while only having 6 units each, and every one of them is quite fine on their own. Still, Drake Fighter is the most main unit, but others can still perform that role depending on matchup or state of the game. So, let's start with units that they have. Drake Fighter is fast, strong, quite tanky, and like most Drakes vulnerable to pierce damage while resilient against blade and impact or fire damage. This is a unit that is the most seen in any of the matchups really. Then we have Clasher. It is even more tanky, no longer vulnerable to pierce, yet still weak against it, with normal 5 MP and 2 damage types of blade and pierce, quite useful overall. Burner is strong ranged attacker, also with only 5 MP, really quite useful if you just need that kind of firepower against undead or trolls or some other unit like heavy infantry. That is really not that relevant in this matchup, but still you have that option. Then we have a Glider, who is scout with ranged marksman and melee impact. Really one of the better units that you can even rush with, potentially. Samurai Skirmisher is the annoying bit, with, well, Skirmisher, 6 MP, pierce resistance and fire and cold, blade and impact weaknesses, shared with Augur. In most matchups it isn't seen that much, but against loyalists or when player has just too many pierce units, it can really shine as a unit that turns away from standard Drake resistances. Finally, Augur is the best mage or perhaps even unit in game, also with 6 MP, good ranged magical attack and heal plus 4 strapped on top for absolutely free. All of that combined with natural high defenses of Saurians leads them to be able to stop even orc rushes with some luck on a terrain heavy map. With so strong roster of units, how are Drakes even remotely balanced? Well, they aren't. They are exploited, and really any faction that can't exploit them will lose against them. So, in default there are 2 ways of exploiting Drakes. The more common one, used by loyalists, elves, dunefolk and dwarves, is having good pierce damage dealer, undead with cold and pierce damage, and finally orcs. Orcs having cheap units. The whole Drake roster is particularly bad at holding rushes, and even would prefer to avoid them entirely rather than actually hold villages. So let's get to explaining why that is, and for that, let's split Drakes into 5 and 6 or more MP units. So in category of 6+, we have Glider, Fighter, Skirmisher and Augur, all reasonably priced, by no means low, but on the lower end. In 5 MP we have 2 units, 21 gold Drake Burner and 19 gold Drake Clasher. Little throwback to the Orcs episode, but in reverse. Drakes are designed as a very strong mid to late game faction with early game weakness. The cheaper the unit is, the more of that early game lower cost strength difference is tied up in movement or movement ability, aka Skirmisher, so making them weaker in direct combat. Meanwhile, expensive units suffer from just having less power overall early on, because of upkeep having less effect on them. Matchups against loyalists, elves, dwarves and dunefolk aren't impacted by that a lot and could be called standard matchups, because all of them don't have that much rush potential in the first place, and the existing options are expensive usually, with dwarves being the closest to potentially being able to pressure Drakes early on in this group, but the difference becomes very much apparent in case of orcs. Every single Northerner unit loses cost effectively against Drake Fighter, yet the matchup is in favor of Northerners. The power difference in the early stage of the game is just that vast between cheap 5 MP grunts and expensive and or 6 MP Drakes and Saurians, yet if you were to wait even 3 to 6 turns between attacks, that matchup flips completely, starting to be completely in favor of Drakes. And then there are Undead, a matchup that is very volatile, with both sides being weak against one another, Undead being able to often grab most of the villages, yet still lose because Drakes just preserved their power enough by either avoiding direct combat or being lucky to flip that completely during the next day. I personally don't quite like that dynamics because in my opinion this matchup is just a bit too fast. In the end, the Drakes are the most late game faction in Default Era, in my opinion, while retaining the fantasy of Drakes, fast, flying, expensive, strong, and Saurians, evasive little monsters that will annoy you to no end with great magic abilities, both of them sharing weaknesses as part of faction identity and at the same time covering each other's weaknesses as part of race and unit identity, leading to a very well designed faction in the end. Well, that would be it for this time. I hope you liked it and I will see you next time. Bye.